Suppose a scientist puts you in a sensory deprivation chamber. You don't feel any smell, you don't hear anything, you don't see anything, you don't feel any touch, so you have no perceptual input. Now suppose the scientist injects a fluid in your veins that makes you become completely amnesic. You remember nothing and you perceive nothing. What is left after all this is what you are.
I'm here with Bernardo Kastrup. And who are you, Bernardo?
People say that I am a philosopher and a computer engineer, and I've written a few books.
People say.
Yeah, I am. I mean, philosophy and engineering is what I do. It's not what I am, right? But yeah, people say I'm a philosopher and an engineer, so I'll go along with that.
That's interesting. But what you really are?
Ooh, difficult to say, isn't it? I'm conscious. I'm alive. What I really am, I don't know. I'm human.
I'm happy, bro. The conscious thing in the beginning. So, can you explain me what you mean by this conscious thing, and explain me this mind-body problem that you are very famously describing?
Yeah, so we are all conscious in the sense that we experience things. We don't live in the dark. We see a world. We feel our feelings. We feel hungry. We feel pain. We experience our fantasies. These are all contents of consciousness. So we are conscious. The mind-body problem arises from a particular metaphysical theory called physicalism or materialism. I will call it materialism because that's what people recognize most. According to materialism, consciousness is somehow generated by the brain. This is not an empirical reality, it's a theory. The problem is that we do not know, even in principle, how the brain could possibly generate the qualities of experience. What it feels like to see the redness of an apple, to taste the sweetness of strawberry, to feel the bitterness of disappointment. There is nothing about physical parameters, like the parameters of our physical brain, in terms of which we could deduce the qualities of experience in principle. That's the mind-body problem.
So, basically, you are explaining that it's if we take this from a physical point of view, we cannot understand why we feel the redness of red.
That's correct. I mean, sometimes we refer to things as physical in the colloquial sense. Like if you are holding a rock in your hand, it's colloquially physical because you feel its solidity, its texture, its temperature. But under the metaphysics of materialism, physical things have no inherent qualities. In other words, the real rock beyond your perception, beyond the experiences that your brain generates when you're holding that rock, that real rock in and of itself is not solid, has no texture, it doesn't feel like anything, it's pure abstraction. And the moment we think that's what the brain is, pure abstraction, we have no way to deduce the qualities of experience from the workings of the brain.
What do you mean by pure abstraction?
Things are not abstractions if you can experience them directly, or at least if you can visualize them in your mind with the qualities of your visualization. But under materialism, the real physical things out there, beyond your perception of them, cannot be visualized. There is nothing they feel like. There is nothing they look like. They are just a set of quantitative physical parameters and geometrical relationships that are impossible to visualize because they are supposed to have no qualities whatsoever. Qualities are under materialism are supposed to be generated by your brain inside your head. There are no qualities outside of your head. It's all pure abstraction. It's your brain that generates the blueness of the sky, the sweetness of a strawberry, the bitterness of disappointment. It's all happening inside your skull, according to materialism. Out there, when you're not looking, it's only abstraction.
So, as I understand, you don't believe this.
No, I think it's unparsimonious, unnecessary, empirically inadequate, and internally contradictory. I think it's stupid.
To believe that that we feel consciousness, there is some part of our brain that feels that feels how to feel the redness of red, and you think this is stupid.
That's stupid. Yeah, there are obvious correlations between brain anatomy and function and experience. They obviously tend to go hand in hand. So that needs to be explained. Why are there these correlations? But there are different explanations that are possible, not only the explanation that the brain generates experience. I'll give you another one. The brain is what experience looks like from a perspective. Your inner conscious life, when observed by me, looks like your brain and your brain activity. In other words, the brain is an image, a representation of your consciousness, not the thing that generates your consciousness. And because images obviously correlate with the thing they are an image of, there are correlations between brain activity and inner experience. That doesn't mean that the brain generates experience.
Okay, interesting. So if you don't agree with this, what do you believe?
Well, I think there is a world out there, just like materialism says, beyond our minds, there is a world in which we live, which we share. I think that's obviously true. If I were in your studio right now, I would be describing your studio in a way consistent with your own experience of it. So clearly, there is some external context that we both inhabit and can describe. But materialism takes it a step further. It says, not only is there a world beyond our individual minds, that world is not mental, it's pure abstraction. Now, this second step is unnecessary. In my view, on the inside, we are made of mental states, experiential states, the qualities of experience. That's how we are from the inside. My view is that on the outside, there are just more experiential states. They are not your experiential states or my experiential states. They are really outside of our minds, but they are also mental. For instance, my thoughts are outside your mind. My thoughts are not part of your mind. You cannot change my thoughts merely by wishing them to be different. And my thoughts would still be here even if you were not. My thoughts do not depend on you for them to exist. So my thoughts are outside your mind. Yet my thoughts are also mental, just like your own thoughts, just like your own emotions. So we know that there can be mental states outside of us. They are mental like our inner states, but they are not our inner states. They are outside. By the same token, my claim is that the external world is made of mental states. They are not your mental states or my mental states. They are outside of both of us, but they are also mental, just like my thoughts are also mental, although they are not in your mind.
Okay, interesting. So you believe that around us, the world that we see is not real and is just mental state.
Well, the world as we experience it not being real is not polemical. Materialism says the same thing. Under materialism, your perception, the qualities of your perception, are just representations of the real world around you. Idealism, which is my view, would say the same. The qualities of our perception, which are our own mental states, they are representations of the world outside. We don't see the world outside as it actually is. We only see the way it presents itself to us. The difference is in what we think the nature of that outside world in and of itself, independent of perception, what that world is. Materialism says it's something totally different from experience, from mentation. It's pure abstraction. And then it runs into the mind body problem. If what is out there, including my body, is pure abstraction, how does it generate the qualities of experience? Nobody has an answer to that. Idealism, which is my view, would say the world as it really is out there, although it is not my perception is just a representation of it, but that world is also mental and it modulates my perception in the sense that one mental process can modulate another mental process. For instance, your thoughts influence your emotions. If you're having negative thoughts, you will have negative emotions. And the other way around. If you're having negative emotions, you will have pessimistic thoughts. What I'm saying is that outside of us, there are mental states that influence our own inner mental states, just like thoughts influence emotions. And that influence from a mental world to another mental inner world is what we call perception. And then you don't have any hard problem because you don't have to go from abstraction to qualities. You only have to go from qualities to qualities. And there is no problem. We know there is no problem because the qualities of your thinking influence the qualities of your emotions every day. So now there is something outside of us which is qualitative and influences our inner states in such a way that we call perception. There is no hard problem involved in this.
Oh, uh, by the way, forgive me if I'm going to be asking some stupid question, but these are some difficult concepts. This is one of the most difficult concept that is bothering humanity for a lot of years now to solve. So I don't think it's for me and the people watching to be weird for us to comprehend that. So I will just try to rephrase the distinction that you make between the physicalist view and your view. So you are basically saying that when the physicalist view have a dead end because they cannot explain the mind body problem, but your theory, you are saying, because it talks about mental states that influence emotions as well, it doesn't is not a problem. There is no problem there for the world to be like that.
That's correct. This only sounds difficult because we have 200 years of culture behind us that have inculcated in our minds that things are different from what I'm saying. If you could step out of that and contemplate what I'm saying without prejudice, it wouldn't be difficult at all. It would be incredibly intuitive and straightforward and even obvious. Let's look at the hard problem. What is the hard problem? The hard problem is that we cannot deduce the qualities of experience from physical parameters. There is nothing about mass, electric charge, geometrical relationships, amplitude, frequency, speed, and direction of movement. There is nothing about any of that that would allow us to say, okay, this mass and this charge, that means that I'm feeling the disappointment of betrayal, or it's that angle and that speed and that direction of movement of the particles inside my brain that means that I'm tasting sweet or that I am seeing blue. This bridge doesn't exist because the worlds of physical parameters and the world of experiential qualities are incommensurable. And I can tell you why that is in a later question. But they are incommensurable. We cannot bridge them. There is no in principle way for us to deduce that if the configuration of your brain is this and that, then that means you will be tasting a sweet strawberry. This bridge is arbitrary, and that's the problem. Under idealism, your brain is not generating your experiences. Your brain is what your experiences look like from the outside. So you no longer need to deduce your experiences from something physical and abstract, because now the brain is just what the experiences look like. And you don't have that issue anymore. The body is what your inner mental life looks like when it's observed from the outside. The body is the appearance of mental inner life, not the cause of mental inner life. And the moment you make this transition, you don't have the heart problem anymore, because you don't need to deduce qualities from quantities anymore.
I think I understood what you mean, but like, how do we touch the where what is reality, like just mental state is like frequency is like if you can help me on that a bit.
Yeah. So that's the origin of the whole problem, what I'm about to say. Frequency, mass in kilograms, length in inches, amplitude, all of these quantities, these numbers that we associate with things, they are descriptions. When you see a table that in your field of view appears this long, you can describe that with a certain number of inches. When you lift a heavy piece of luggage, that experience of lifting that piece of luggage, you can describe that with a certain number of kilograms or pounds or ounces. When you see the redness of an apple, you can describe that with a certain number in terahertz, a frequency number. These are descriptions of what appears on the screen of perception. Sometimes what we are describing is even the output of an instrument. Like suppose you're not lifting that piece of luggage yourself. You're putting it on a weighing instrument, a balance. And then you see a certain number on the indicator. Well, 50 kilograms or 100 pounds is a description of that visual experience of the output of an instrument. So numbers, physical quantities, are descriptions of the contents of perception. That's what they are. That's how they make sense. That's how they have meaning. But under materialism, a very strange move was made. What they decided was that the descriptions precede the thing described. That the 50 kilograms comes before your experience of the piece of luggage. And the 50 kilograms, in fact, gives the essence, the substance of the piece of luggage, as opposed to being merely a description of it. And that's the origin of the problem, because now effectively what we are doing is we are saying the map comes before the territory, and the territory is generated by the map. So if you have a map of California, that map existed before California, and you produce California by reaching your hand into the map and pulling California out of it. That's materialism. That's what we are doing when we say the brain generates experience. We are taking the description of the brain, that appearance on the screen of perception that we call a brain. We describe it with a bunch of numbers, and then we are saying now out of that bunch of numbers comes experience, my conscious inner life. It's like trying to pull the territory out of the map. So we have to keep in mind that what is really out there is of the same nature, the same essence as what is in here. And what is in here are experiences. So out there are experiences. And both present themselves to observation as what we colloquially call matter. My inner experience presents itself to your observation as the matter of my body. But the rest of the universe is also made of matter in the colloquial sense, the same kinds of atoms and force fields. So if the matter of my body is what my inner mentation looks like, then the matter of the universe is what the universe's instrumentation looks like upon being observed from the outside. And the numbers are now just descriptions of these appearances, which is what they were in the beginning until we took this mad step of saying that the map comes before the territory.
Okay, so you're basically saying that this idealism view that you're describing is all like we experience. The word is all about all experiences together.
I'm not saying that the world is your experience of it. I think your experience of the world is an inner representation of the world that you create. The world as it is in itself doesn't look like what you see in perception, because your perception is an internal cognitive representation that you make of the world. But the
Yes.
world is also made of experiential states, not your perceptual states, because those are representations, but the states of the world in and of themselves are also experiential. Just in the
So
same way,
the word experiencing itself, like I'm experiencing myself.
correct. The universe is experiencing itself, not exactly in the same way that you experience yourself, because you're a different kind of experiencer, but the universe is also experiencing itself. You are experiencing yourself from within, the universe is experiencing itself from within. From the
And
perspective
this
of the rest of the universe, you look like a body.
and the same does a plant does, the same does the dog does.
I, the question is, where are the boundaries of different subjects, right? Because you are a subject, you only experience what happens within your own mind. You're not experiencing what's happening in my mind, or you're not experiencing what's happening on the moon or in the galaxy of Andromeda. So there is a boundary that separates your mind from the other minds in nature, including the mind of nature at large, the universe at large, which is not a living being. Where those boundaries are is an important question. I think those boundaries correspond to living, metabolizing beings, to organisms, living organisms, biology, metabolism. So I would think that a plant indeed also experiences its own inner life in a much simpler way than we do, but it also experiences its own internal mental states. A cat does that too. You and I do that. And then after you account for all living beings, the rest of the universe remains, the inanimate universe. I would say that the inanimate universe also experiences itself from within, and its internal mental states present themselves to our observation as the stars and planets, galaxies, galaxy clusters, quasars, black holes, and so forth.
So where we draw the line, I'm not sure if I understood. Does a rock has experience? Does the air has experience? Does a molecule has experience?
No, no, that would be panpsychism, and panpsychism is physically incoherent. We can explore that if you want, but the simple answer is no. I think the boundary lies on the boundaries of living organisms. If a photon hits your retina, you see it, you experience it. But if it hits the chair you are sitting on, you don't experience it. If I prick your arm with a needle, you feel it. But if I prick your chair with the same needle, you don't feel it. So the boundary of your inner experience is the boundary of your body. So I would say um, that's where boundaries always lie. The boundaries correspond to the boundaries of living organisms. Um, Atoms and subatomic particles, uh, they do not have these boundaries. In other words, an atom doesn't have its own private inner life.
But what they are, because they are something in my life, like the phone is something in my life. So
So
it's
what the
nothing
atoms
basic.
are?
Yes, it's nothing basically. It's like an interface, like an interface of experience or something. What is it?
Exactly. Yeah. You are with me. You're sharp on this. Um, you know, atoms are reducible. They are made of lower level subatomic particles. Atoms are made of electrons, protons, and neutrons. Protons and neutrons are made of quarks and gluons. So you can go down. And at the bottom of that, you get elementary subatomic particles, which are the tiniest parts of nature that we can discern with instrumentation. Now, what is that? What does that mean that nature is made of little subatomic particles, little indivisible particles? What does that mean? Well, imagine that you and I are having a phone call. And well, we are having it right now, right? I can see your face on my screen. You can see my face on your screen. Now, if you were to look at my image on your screen very closely, maybe with a magnifying glass, you would see that my image on your screen is pixelated. It's made of little rectangles. And those rectangles are the lowest resolution, the highest resolution part of the image. The image is made of those little pixels. That's what elementary subatomic particles are. They are the pixels of the screen of perception. When we perceive the world, basically what we are seeing is how the world presents itself to us on a screen, just like I am presenting myself to you on your screen right now. What you see is not me. What you see is a representation of me. My proposal is that the physical universe around us is our representation of the real world out there. It's not the real world as it is, it's a representation thereof, just like the pixels on your screen are a representation of me, but they are not me. Now, that representation on your screen is pixelated. So is the universe when it presents itself on the screen of our perception. And what are those pixels? Elementary subatomic particles. In other words, subatomic particles are not things, just like pixels are not things, they are just
But
segments of
but
an image.
we can touch them and feel them. Wouldn't be like the image put our hand inside and get from the other side or something.
No, the screen of perception is not only what you see, but what you can touch, what you can smell, what you can hear. And our cognitive apparatus has evolved to tie those five different senses together in a self consistent way. So what you feel when you touch is consistent with what you see, which is consistent with what you hear. That's by construction. The five different senses are just five different data channels that are collecting and providing information about the same thing that is out there. And they were constructed to be mutually consistent. Vision
and
has,
and that's why we're confused and we think that this is real, but it's not.
well, it's real as a representation, and it does convey accurate information about something real out there. Let me give you another example. Suppose you're a pilot and you're flying an airplane, and the airplane has transparent windscreens, right? Windshields. Um, so the pilot can see the world as it probably really is. But in addition to the transparent windshields, the pilot has a dashboard of instruments. And when the weather outside is really bad and it's at night, the windows of the airplane show you nothing. It's all dark and fuzzy. You can't discern anything. So you have to fly by instruments. You have to trust the indications on your dashboard. Now, pretend that our airplane has no windows at all. Like supersonic airplanes that are being designed now, they don't have windows because glass is not strong enough. So the pilots will fly purely by instrumentation. They have a dashboard of dials that convey information about the world. The airplane has sensors. It measures the external states of the world and then presents the results of those measurements on dial indications on the dashboard. Now, the pilot must take the dashboard seriously. If the pilot ignores the dashboard, the plane will crash because the dashboard conveys important information about the world. But the pilot doesn't think that the dashboard is the world. The world is outside, behind the dashboard. The dashboard is a representation of the world that we have to take seriously, otherwise, we will crash the plane. Now, perception is just like that. We also have sensors, like the airplane, retinas, eardrums, surface of the skin. We make measurements on the world. The results of those measurements are presented to us in the form of a dashboard, the screen of perception, the colloquially physical stuff that we see, hear, touch around us. Those are dashboard representations. They are not the world. They are a representation of the world. And we have to take the representation seriously, otherwise, we are going to walk under a truck. But we take the
Yes.
representation not only seriously, we take it literally. We are pilots that were born inside a plane without windows. All they have is the dashboard. And they grow up thinking that the dashboard is the world. That's us thinking that the world is physical. Physicality is the dashboard. The thing that is represented as physicality is mental and not directly accessible to us. Perception is not a transparent window that allows us to see the world as it is. It can't be for thermodynamic reasons, for game theory reasons. We can explore that if you want. But we know that perception cannot show us the world as it is. And what is physical is perception, because the contents of perception are what we can describe through physical quantities, like length, weight, frequency, amplitude. These are descriptions of the dials on the dashboard and the dial indications. The thing that is being represented on the dials is not physical, and it's not describable by physical quantities either, because physical quantities were not made to describe the world as it is. They were made to describe the dashboard. In other words, the physical world on the screen of perception. And elementary subatomic particles are the pixels of the representation, not the parts or building blocks of the real world out there.
I think this is a beautiful example that made me understand exactly what you mean. So, so use that more often. This is a great example. So okay, I think I finally understood what you mean. But let's say if you are right, what does that mean for our world? Like, we need to do different science. We are going to discover teleporting or something. What does that mean?
There's a bunch of things that don't change and a bunch of things that change completely. So let's start from what doesn't change. Science will hardly change. Whatever science has discovered so far remains valid, because under this view, there is still an external world beyond our individual minds. It's a mental world, all right, but it's not made of our mentation. So we can't change it by merely fantasizing it to be different. And the world will not cease to exist after we die, because it doesn't depend on our existence to exist. And that's the fundamental uh, um, um, premise of science, that what we study is an external world that doesn't depend on us and doesn't depend on observation. My view maintains that. And then you might say, well, then it's the same as physicalism or materialism. No, it's completely different because the implications are completely different. Let me just give you two of the big ones, of the big differences in implications. Under materialism, yes, there is an external world, and they are right about that, but they think that your consciousness, your experiences are generated by your brain, by your metabolizing, active brain. So when you die, your consciousness stops, no longer exists. Your memories disappear, everything you learned in life, gone, lost forever. All of your insights, all of your memories, your experiences, all gone. You're not going to be around as a conscious being, because the brain is supposed to generate it, and after you die, your brain stops metabolizing and eventually decomposes. Now, under my view, we are dissociated personalities of the mind of nature, like a person with multiple personality disorder, who has different alters or different centers of awareness. This is a well-known psychiatric condition. It's for real. We have measured it ad nauseum in the past 20 years. We know it's real. That's what we are. We are dissociated mental complexes of this one mind of nature, this one field of subjectivity that nature is. That's
So
what the
what
body
you
is.
w- so we are what, let's say, neurons are for us, for the consciousness of the whole world and planet and universe,
I'll
something
try to
like
say it
that.
more precisely. Um, if there are dissociative alters in the mind of nature, they should look like something. Because when we have a patient with dissociative identity disorder and we put that patient under a brain scanner, we can see the dissociative processes. They look like something, they have an appearance. So if the mind of nature undergoes dissociation, then these dissociative alter personalities, which are sort of centers of experience within a bigger mind, they also should look like something. My view is that indeed they do, and what they look like is a living body, a living organism, a metabolizing organism. That's what a dissociative alter in the mind of nature looks like. So that's what life is. Life is what a dissociation in the mind of nature looks like when observed from the outside. But in that case, what is death? Well, death is then the end of the dissociation, not the end of your consciousness. Death is then the reabsorption of your conscious inner life into a broader mental context. It's a remembrance. Just like when you're dreaming at night, you're asleep and you're dreaming, you are dissociated. Why? Because you think you are your dream avatar, but not the rest of the dream. When you see houses and cars and other people in your dream, you do not know that those houses and cars and other people, they are also you. It's your mind making that stuff up. But during the dream, you don't know that. You only identify with the dream avatar. So you are dissociated from the parts of your mind that are generating the rest of the dream. A dream state is a dissociative state. When you wake up, your dream avatar dies. The dissociation ends. And you remember the dream and you know, oh, I made up the whole thing. It was me doing the whole thing. And your dream avatar is toast. He dies.
Uh,
My
can,
contention is
can,
that,
can,
yeah,
can you explain me before you continue? Because I'm a bit stupid, maybe English illiterate, what dissociation means?
dissociation is when one mind seems to divide itself into multiple different centers of awareness that no longer identify with one another. I don't know whether you have seen a film about multiple personality disorder. Oh no, let's take another film that's much more popular, Fight Club. Remember Fight Club? With, I uh, forgot the actors, the name of the Brad Pitt, and the other guy is one of my favorite actors. I forgot his name. Um, so I don't know whether you have seen that, but in the film there are two characters that are different people throughout the film, except at the end when you discover that they were the same person. That both characters were one and the same person, and the film shows how that one person experiences his life and that person is dissociated. So, in his own inner life, he partitions his own mind into two different centers of awareness that do not have direct access to each other's thoughts and emotions. That's a dissociation, is when one mind seems to be many.
Okay, I understood what a dissociation is. So you are not saying by any chance that me and you, or me and my mother, we are we have we are in some way the same experience sometimes or something, right? You're not saying
No,
that.
no, no. I'm saying that you and everybody else share the same subjectivity as the rest of nature. In other words, we are not really separate. We seem to be separate because we are dissociated from nature and dissociated from one another. We are like the two characters in Fight Club. They are dissociated from one another. And what each dissociative process looks like is a living organism. That's what life is. It's the extrinsic or external appearance of a dissociative process in the mind of nature. And because you and I are dissociative processes, we are dissociated from one another, and I can't read your thoughts, and presumably you can't read mine either, because we are dissociated, and the appearance of the dissociation is a living body. So, what is death? The end of the living body.
If I
It's the
could
end of
read
the
your mind,
dissociation.
if I could read your mind, was this interview was going to be so easy. So, what
But
is death? You said is the end of the association,
the end of the dissociation. In other words,
dissociation.
it's the reassociation of your inner life into the very fabric of nature. It's when you remember what was going on, just like when you wake up from your dream, and then you remember what you really are, and you remember that, oh, you remember the dream, but you know you were doing the whole thing. So, in my view, death is akin, or it's like waking up from a dream. It's the moment when the dissociation ends and you remember what was
Interesting.
actually going on. And that's a very
You
different implication to physicalism, in which death is the end of your mind. Under idealism, death is the reintegration of your mind into the broader mind of nature. Nothing's lost.
and and
You don't
and what
mourn.
happens next
That
when
I
you
would
wake
be
up?
I would be a liar if I gave you an answer. And then the only answer is I don't know. What I'm sharing with you is what I think is the most logical, empirically consistent, and parsimonious inference we can make about what's going on. But notice that people who say, when you're dead, it's the end of your mind, that's an inference too. How do they know? Have they died for real and returned? If you think some people die and return, well, listen to what those people are saying. What they are saying is that it's not the end of your consciousness. So
So
that's a big difference with materialism.
yes, a huge difference with materialism. And I just want to rephrase that. It's interesting. So what you're trying to do, let's say, it's we have a dead end that doesn't describe the world, the physicalist view, and you are
Mhm.
proposing one solution here that it seems that doesn't have a dead end, in your opinion.
Correct.
So this is what science is, to find a better explanation for how the world works. So I just
That
wanted to rephrase that, why this is important.
that's correct. What I'm doing is in the spirit of science. We are trying to find a better, more empirically adequate, more parsimonious, economical explanation for what's going on. So yes, you're correct.
Interesting. So do do when the two consciousness, my consciousness, now we're together, like, is it an exchange of information again? Is it exchange of uh does anything happens? Or when we have sex and we have kids, does anything happens there in the experience more than you describe, or is just on the realm of experiences?
Yeah. In principle, since each living body is the image of a dissociative process, if there are other living bodies, your partner, your kids, they too are dissociated from you, and they will remain dissociated for as long as you are all alive. The dissociation only ends at, at the moment of death, because that's what death is the end of the dissociation. Now, having said that, no process in nature is completely perfect. Um, when it stops raining, the ground doesn't dry instantly. when something goes up on fire, the fire doesn't combust everything that can be combusted. No process in nature is bulletproof and perfect. So we have no reason to think that the dissociation is perfect either. In other words, our
So we might
dissociative boundary,
lose some stuff on the dissociation, a lot
there
of it.
may be some exchanges, and that may be what people refer to as telepathy or precognition. I don't know. These things are very hard to study under controlled conditions. But idealism leaves that door open. Nothing, no process in nature is perfect. So why would dissociation be perfect? It's conceivable that sometimes there is a direct exchange of mental contents across dissociative boundaries. In other words, telepathy. It's conceivable. I am not going to put my hand on the fire for that, because these things are very, very difficult to study under laboratory conditions. But conceivably, this is a coherent hypothesis. Yeah.
Very interesting. So you said under control conditions. Does that involves quantum mechanics? Because when we observe something changes or something, this is what you mean, or is
No,
something else that you mean by that?
no, I didn't mean this at all. The difficulty is that instances of precognition or telepathy, they change to they tend to happen spontaneously. In other words, people don't choose when they will have a telepathic experience or when they will have a precognitive experience. They don't get to choose when it happens. It just happens to them. They can't call it up. They can't say, okay, now I'm going to read somebody else's mind. That doesn't
Yes,
seem to be the way it works. So you cannot put a set of volunteers or subjects in a laboratory under fully controlled conditions and tell them, okay, now do something telepathic. It doesn't work like
yes,
that. It only works spontaneously in the real world when you are not controlling the conditions. And that's why it's so difficult to study. And
yes.
look, ultimately, to me, it doesn't matter, because whether telepathic experiences happen or not, uh, the case for idealism remains the same. It remains just as strong.
So I for this podcast I interviewed Donald Hoffman and Philip Golf as well. It's I don't know if they are uh, and like also I noticed watching all this your podcast and other podcasts, idealism
Yeah.
is a bit of a concept that is shaded in the in this world of intellectual. I don't know if you feel that that way, that is not very famous yet, and there is some I don't know. So I first of all I want you to draw me the distinctions between what Donald Hoffman theory is and panpsychism. So that would be amazing.
Yeah. No, just a brief comment first. Um, Prejudice against idealism is changing very fast. And the reason there is prejudice is that people, including academics and people with high degrees, they tend to mix up idealism for solipsism, the notion that the entire world is in your mind and there is no external world. That's not idealism, that's solipsism, and solipsism is impossible to argue for. The moment people really understand the difference between the two, there is little prejudice against idealism, and whatever little there is, it's going away fast. But there are, of course, these bozos out there who criticize idealism because in their minds it's solipsism. One of them was what's his name? One of the four uh, riders of the apocalypse. I forgot his name, but he gave an interview. Was it to Lex Friedman? And he said, "Idealism can be true because, of course, the universe is not in my mind." And I just went, "Oh my God, what a darn idiot!" And he thinks he understands what he's saying. Sam Harris
Oh,
is the
some
guy.
hard, yes.
Sam Harris doesn't even begin to understand the shit. That guy is a anyway. But idealism was once mainstream.
I love that you are honest and you say how you feel.
No, he likes to speak authoritatively about things he doesn't even begin to understand, and he has no idea how far behind the curve he is. But which makes it silly to watch. But anyway, now in the first half of the 19th century, idealism was mainstream in Europe. It changed after Darwin. But in the first half of the 19th century, idealism was mainstream. So I am not bringing forward anything new. I'm not the first. Idealism has been around for 3,500 years. It began in the Indus Valley, in what is today India and Pakistan. It's 3,500 years old. So there's a lot of history on this. Now, Donald Hoffman. Donald is, I would say, he's an idealist. He will not say this because he's a scientist, not a philosopher. So he's trying to
conscious
account
realist, he's saying.
Conscious realism. Conscious realism means, well, let's divide it into two words. Realism means there is a real world out there. It's not all made up by my own mind. And conscious means that real world is conscious. In other words, it's idealism. Donald and I are largely, not completely, but largely saying the same thing. We are just approaching it from two different perspectives. Donald is approaching it from a science perspective. He wants to predict the behavior of nature through his model of conscious agents. I come at it from an analytic philosophical perspective. I want to figure out what nature is, not predict its behavior. But Donald's conclusions dovetail almost completely with my own conclusions. And we know that because we have had hours-long conversations, not only public ones, but between the two of us. Now, Philip is different. Philip used to be an idealist, I think until 2019 or round about that. And then he became a panpsychist, which is an enormous step backward. I don't know what happened to Philip. He saw the light and then unsaw it. And now he's peddling something that is downright silly. It's physically incoherent. What he's saying is the following. Remember that I told you elementary subatomic particles are not things. They are just the pixels of the screen of perception. They're just the smallest elements of a representation, not the world. But Philip thinks elementary subatomic particles are things. Not only that, they are irreducible things that cannot be explained in terms of anything else. And there are bazillions of these fundamental things out there distributed across space and time, and each one of them is conscious. Every little muon, every little electron, every little gluon, every little quark is conscious. There is something it is like to be an electron. There is something it is like to be a photon. In other words, the pixels on your iPhone screen are conscious. A bunch of little conscious pixels. Well, there are a bunch of problems with this, philosophical problems and scientific problems. Let's start with the philosophical one. In Philip's theory, the elementary subatomic particles in my head, each one of them is a subject. And then they combine their subjectivity inside my skull to give rise to my unitary subjectivity as Bernardo Kastrup. The problem is that there is no explicit and coherent account for how these combinations of subjectivities can happen. It's an appeal to magic. But there is a worse problem with panpsychism, which is that it assumes that elementary subatomic particles are little building blocks of nature, like little marbles distributed across space-time, irreducible little marbles. This is Physics has known that this is not the case, at least since the 1940s with Richard Feynman's quantum electrodynamics. which later became quantum field theory. So Philip Goff is appealing to physics that is more than 100 years old.
So you think his theory of panpsychism is worse than the realism? Not is worse than the physicalist view?
It's worse than physicalism, because physicalism at least is physically coherent and panpsychism is not. Panpsychism flies in the face of what we know in science, in foundations of physics. Most people don't know this, and that's why Philip didn't know that, although he should have studied it before he came out with a book talking this nonsense. In science today, what we call a particle...
I love you.
I'm Dutch. I'm very open, and I say it as I see it. Look, we have known for almost 100 years that what we call a particle isn't a little marble. What we call particles in physics are shorthand for field excitations. So what is a particle in physics? I'll try to explain that with a metaphor again. This is quantum field theory, but it will sound very easy. Everybody will understand it. Imagine that there is a lake, and then you drop a rock on that lake, and these ripples form, these rings that ripple out from the point of impact. Each one of those ripples has physical characteristics. They have a certain length, a certain breadth, a certain height, a certain mass, a certain speed and direction of movement. You can characterize a ripple. You can even point at its location and say, here is the ripple. You can find its boundaries. You can measure how fast it travels, in what direction. And yet, there is nothing to the ripple but the lake. The ripple is not a thing. You can't catch the ripple and lift it off the lake, because there is no such a thing. A ripple is not a thing. A ripple is a doing. A ripple is something the lake is doing. But there is only the lake. There is nothing to the ripple but the lake. The ripple is not a thing. This is what particles are in field quantum theory. There are underlying fields, so-called quantum fields. They are like the lake. And when they ripple, you get particles. Particles are ripples of the quantum field, and particles have measurable physical characteristics: mass, charge, angular momentum. You can measure all that. But a ripple also has physical characteristics: breadth, length, speed, and direction of movement. And yet there is nothing to the ripple but the lake. In the same way, elementary subatomic particles with physical characteristics, there is nothing to them but the quantum field. That's how particles are used in physics, and you cannot escape this. If you think particles are marbles, nothing of what's happening at CERN right now, and I used to work there, makes any sense. Quantum fluctuations make no sense. Particle interactions make no sense. Particle decay makes no sense. Nothing makes sense if you think of particles as marbles. And we've known that for 100 years almost. Particles are not things. They're not marbles. They are ripples on a field, like ripples on a lake. Therefore, if the panpsychist wants to attribute consciousness as a property of an irreducible physical entity, it has to be the field, because there's nothing to the particle but the field. You can't attribute consciousness to an electron. You have to attribute consciousness to the field underlying electromagnetism, to the entire field. And those fields have no spatial boundaries. It's the same fields underlying your mind and my mind. So panpsychism implodes the moment you understand old physics. So it baffles me that Philip keeps insisting on this nonsense, even after I have already pointed this out in writing to him. He appeals to another niche interpretation of quantum mechanics called Bohmian mechanics, which is a dead end. It was abandoned by its own creator in the 1950s already. It has no relativistic extension. In other words, it's not true. And even if one would build a relativistic extension for Bohmian mechanics, it would necessarily imply that you have to abandon the notion of particles as marbles, because otherwise you can't account for quantum fluctuations, particle decay, particle interactions, none of this stuff that constitutes the foundation of nature.
Now that you're saying this stuff, I saw recently you did a form of debate with Susan Blackmore, and maybe it will be fun for you to do a debate with with Philip Golf on
I
maybe
have done it.
how
I have
you've
done
done
it,
it.
but it's a frustrating experience because he becomes emotional and starts moving his arms around, and it's like, okay, you know, I can take a lot of stuff, but I need any debate to remain focused on the issues in contention and not deviate towards ancillary things or emotionally driven quote arguments. Otherwise, it frustrates me. It becomes unpleasant.
Can you explain me what you mean by that? Because I didn't understand exactly what type of debate you like.
If we're having a debate about issue A, I want the debate to stay focused on issue A instead of going to B, C, D, E, F, and I want a discussion to remain focused on the issues in contention. And when the other person involved in the debate starts digressing to all kinds of other things and never exploring one issue thoroughly, it frustrates me, because it's like I'm trying to draw a bird and this bird keeps on flying around. you know, I don't like people who do not allow themselves to be pinned down on their positions because they keep on digressing. And this is frustrating to me. I like to stay on the issue. Let's drill it down to the end. Let's not digress it the moment it starts looking ugly for you. And unfortunately, this is a rhetorical technique that some people use. When it starts looking bad for them, they will digress. Sometimes in an obvious way, they will start talking about something else. Sometimes in a discreet way, like they will start interviewing me, which puts the focus on my position as opposed to my critique of theirs. So there are all kinds of things people do to
So
avoid losing face.
it's an art to make a thoughtful debate.
I think it's very easy to do it. What is difficult is to digress and avoid losing face. It's, if you don't have your ego invested in it, if you are ethical and you're committed to truth, not to how good you look, it's very easy to have a very good debate. Very easy. It's natural. But when people have their egos invested in a certain position, they don't want to look bad. That's when it becomes unpleasant and frustrating.
Do we have free will?
Okay, that's a curved ball you threw at me. Came out of nowhere. I think free will is a red herring. If I say yes, he will not understand what I mean. If I say no, he will not understand what I mean. Let me try to explain what I actually mean. When we talk about free will, we don't mean that our choices are random, right? A free-willed choice is not a random choice. You're not throwing dice, throwing a coin to make a choice. That's not free will. Free will choices are not random. But a free will choice is also not determined, because if it's determined, it's not free. And if it's random, it's not will. So it's something in between. The problem is there is nothing in between. There is no semantic space in between. A choice is either determined or it is random. And we try to figure out this non-existing space in between the two to talk about free will. What we actually mean is that a free-willed choice is determined, but it is determined by that which we identify with, that which we think of as ourselves. And we do not think of neurons in our head as ourselves. We've never seen them. We don't identify with them. They are an abstraction for us. So if somebody tells you your choices are determined by the neurons in your head, then it feels like it's not free because I am not those neurons. But if you are those neurons, or if those neurons represent what you are, if they don't cause what you are, but they represent what you are, like in my view, then the choice of your neurons is your choice. And it's both determined and willful.
Oh,
It's
no,
not random.
please. So you're saying it's both we have and we don't have.
And the reason for that is that I think the concept of free will is incoherent. It's pointing at a semantic space that doesn't exist. And if we would only think it through with discipline and conceptual clarity, we would realize that that the concept itself is incoherent. It's like saying, is the number five married or not? And then we go have a whole debate about whether the number five is married or the number five is not married. Well, it's incoherent. It's a category mistake. I think much of the debate around free will is a category mistake. We are pointing at a ghost and a semantic space that is not there. So if we say yes, you're wrong. If you say no, you're wrong, because the concept itself is incoherent. So, to
But
boil it down
okay,
to some,
you are saying that the concept is incoherent, and but so who is taking the decisions? And is it me? Is it the circumstance? It's confusing when what you're saying.
it depends on what the me is. We know who is taking the decision. It's nature. Nature is taking the decision. You are part of nature. You're not outside of nature. You're not standing outside the theater looking at what's going on inside. No, you're right in the middle of it. You are a product of nature.
So we
And
don't have
nature
free
is
will.
taking, wait, nature is taking the decision. And then you said, well, free will is when the me is taking the decision. Now I ask you, who is the me? Who is the I for you? Who is the I for you? Is it
Let's
Phidias?
let's agree that is what you're describing, my consciousness, the monkey
Then
seeing the
yes,
monkey.
yes, your consciousness is nature. Nature is an extended field of subjectivity. That's what nature is, and you are it. So yes, you, the real you, is making every possible choice. Every choice that there is in the whole dance of nature, you are making it because you are nature. You're not outside nature. But if you ask,
But I'm
is
a very small part of nature, right?
then you are not your consciousness. Now you're saying Phidias is the ego. The ego is a mental complex. It's that little narrative inside your mind that is saying, I was born on that date at that place, and I do this and that, and I'm married with that person, and I have these kids. That's a narrative. If you think that you are that narrative, you are making very few choices, hardly any. That narrative is choosing the best way to get to work in the morning or what the best mortgage package is, but you're not choosing what you think. You're not choosing what you feel. Can you choose your next thought? Can you choose your
No.
feelings? If you could, you would never be depressed. You would never be afraid. Do you choose who you marry? You don't. You don't choose who you marry. You fall in love. Otherwise, you would choose to fall in love by the easiestly available girl. But we don't. We fall in love with the person we fall in love, and there's nothing we can do about it. You don't choose your thoughts, you don't choose your emotions, you don't choose who you fall in love with. Phidias, the ego, hardly chooses anything. Does it have free will? You bet it doesn't. But the real you is making every possible decision there is to be made.
So
The real
now
you, which is telling that narrative, that thing
now
telling the
it
narrative.
got me some flashbacks while you were talking to when I was talking with Donald Hoffman. He said, you are the real you when you forget all the stories about you.
Exactly. Exactly. I'll tell you what the real you is. Suppose a scientist.
Ah, this is beautiful. You are pushing my brain to so many places.
Let's make it worse. Let's make it worse. Suppose suppose a scientist puts you in a floating tank. You know what a floating tank is? It's a sensory deprivation chamber. When you're
Yes.
lying on a floating tank, it's perfectly dark, it's perfectly silent, and because you're floating on very dense, salty water, you don't feel any sense of touch. It's like you're floating in space. Nothing touches you. You don't feel any smell, you don't hear anything, you don't see anything, you don't feel any touch, you don't taste anything. So you have no perceptual input. Now, suppose the scientist puts you there, so you perceive nothing. Now, suppose the scientist injects a fluid in your veins that makes you become completely amnesic. You don't remember anything. You don't remember where you were born, when, what you do. You don't even remember your humanity or your language. You remember nothing and you perceive nothing. What is left after all this is what you are. Everything else is a particular content of experience, is a particular excitation of your mind, of your subjectivity, a particular story you tell yourself, and then you begin to believe it. But behind all of these excitations, there is the thing that gets excited. And that thing that gets excited is what you experience when you perceive nothing inside the sensory deprivation chamber and you are completely amnesic. What is left of your experience at that point, that is what you are. And that takes every decision in nature. Everything that has ever happened in the history of the universe was decided by that which is left behind when you perceive nothing and you remember nothing. And that is the
And
same in
and
me.
and that thing is still alive when we die?
But of course not, because death is the end of life by linguistic definition. But that thing is still conscious after you die.
Okay.
And
So
look, that thing is the same in you and me. Because if I am in another sensory deprivation chamber, also completely amnesic, what I will experience then is exactly the same as what you will experience in
so
your
so
sensory
the
deprivation
the
chamber.
the thing that is taking the decisions for your life is taking the decisions for my life.
Yes. And for everybody else's life. And for every black hole and every star. Uh,
Yes, you are making things worse.
if
So
you
we have a connected free will, all humans.
uh, I'll try to clarify it conceptually. I was trying to appeal to your intuition. Now I'll try to clarify it conceptually. The answer,
Oh my god, I love you. You are clever.
the answer to your question is yes. The free will in you is the same free will in me. Why? Why is that? The point I'm trying to make is that what nature is a spatially unbound field of subjectivity. Particular experiences are particular excitations of this field, like a guitar string. One guitar string can play multiple notes. Each note is a particular pattern of excitation of that guitar string, and they are all different from one another. But there is nothing to them but the guitar string itself. One guitar string can get excited in different ways and produce many different notes. In the same way, my contention is that what nature is one field of subjectivity. But like the guitar string, that field of subjectivity can self excite to play many different notes. These different notes are the variety and richness of nature, the different stars, planets, moons, volcanoes, living beings, forests, rivers, oceans, the whole shebang. Each one of these discernible elements of nature is a particular pattern of excitation of that one underlying string, that one underlying field of subjectivity. The dance of existence is the music of the field of subjectivity, just like the music of a guitar string with its many notes are just excitations of that one string. And there is nothing to the excitations but the string in movement. What is free will then? Free will is the impetus to excite, to self-excite, to vibrate. In a guitar string, that impetus comes from the outside. The musician needs to pluck the guitar string. In the case of the subjectivity of nature, it plucks itself. And that act of how it will pluck itself is a free will choice. Now, even then, the concept of free will is still incoherent, and I'll tell you why. Because what determines the choices of nature is what nature is. And it can't be something other than what it is. Therefore, its choices are determined by what it is. But since it is making the choices, you can say it's a free will choice. Okay, free will and determinism become one and the same thing at that level. The choices of nature are always and only determined by what nature is. Nature can't be anything else other than what it is. But because these choices are made by nature, then nature has free will. And that free will is the same in you and me and everybody else, because we are all this underlying field of subjectivity. We are just segments of this field that become dissociated from one another, like the mind of a patient of dissociative identity disorder also becomes dissociated, or the way your mind becomes dissociated when you're dreaming. The mind of your dream avatar is dissociated from the mind that is creating the rest of the dream. So we are the dreamer, but the dreamer becomes dissociated in the dream and starts to think that it is me and it is you and it is somebody else. But the entire dream is being determined by the dreamer. And you are the dreamer. You just forget that you are it because you're dissociated. And then you start saying, yeah, but does the avatar in the dream chooses the rest of the dream? No, but the avatar in the dream is not a thing. It's a doing of the dreamer. The avatar is the dreamer. There is nothing to the avatar but the dreamer. And the dreamer is making every choice. So for as long as you are deluded that you are the avatar, you have no free will. But the moment you understand that that avatar is just a narrative you're telling yourself, that you are the dreamer, you have absolute free will. That's what I'm trying to get across.
I think I understood the distinction. So you're saying basically, if we're talking about Phidias and to design the life that he wants, absolutely no free will there. But
or at least very little. Very little. You can choose your way to work in the morning or your mortgage package. That's about it.
One of the two. Which one you think is more likely? Now free will or very little?
I think very little, because the ego is itself a segment of that one subject of nature. And as a segment of it, it can self-excite in particular ways. So yes, it can choose the best way to work. It can choose the best mortgage package, but it doesn't choose your next thought. It doesn't choose how you feel. It doesn't choose what you want. It doesn't choose who you fall in love with. It doesn't choose your fears. It doesn't choose your sense of meaning. It doesn't even choose your damn profession. And if it succeeds in choosing your profession, you're in for a very difficult life.
But the other free will decides who you will marry, what profession you are desire. The nature free will.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean that those decisions will be wise. I'm not saying that the mind of nature is a wise God. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's a spontaneous mind that makes every choice. And some of those choices can be very ill-advised.
This is what Donald Hoffman, I think, is claiming, that the mind of nature is very wise. That's why he's doing 3 hours meditation every day.
I'm not sure about that, because if the mind of nature were very wise, there would be no war going on in Ukraine right now. There would be no sadism and torture and incredibly difficult lives. People wouldn't be suffering
but
as
but
overwhelmingly as they are.
you don't know what the reality is to judge it by the outcome, or the
Correct.
reality's goals.
Correct. Maybe there is a higher point of view in which all of this is actually for the ultimate good. It's possible, but
But why it
I
needs
will
to be for
remain.
the ultimate good is not necessary.
No, it's possible that something that is horrible when you observe it locally, in the grander scheme of things, it's actually for the best. So
Yes.
that's possible. Um, but I am too aware of the unspeakable levels of suffering that people go through, and animals as well, to think that the mind of nature is a self-aware, very wise mind with our best interests in mind. You know, forget human beings. You could say, well, human beings have invented evil. Okay, but let's look at the rest of nature. I have seen a documentary once, a nature documentary, in which a pride of lions managed to isolate an adult elephant from the rest of the group. And then they brought that adult elephant down and began to eat the elephant while the elephant was alive. And they were eating the elephant from the hind legs up. A whole pride of lions eating on that elephant. And it took the elephant 6 hours to lose consciousness, to pass out. 6 hours of being eaten alive. That's nature. Do you think a self aware, deliberate, metacognizant mind has chosen that? I don't. Every cell in my body says no. If if that was a premeditated, carefully considered choice, then I renounce my participation in nature. I don't want to be part of this. What's happening in
uh,
Ukraine now? I mean, you are in America, so you're where you're from Europe as well. I
I
gather
am from Cyprus. Yes.
you're from Cyprus. So it's close to your original place, the war in Ukraine. In America, maybe people are not following it as much as we are, because the war is happening less than a day drive from my front door, and there are people I know and care about who are involved in the war.
Yes, and
So I
yes,
get to
we
see
have more
stuff.
people. We have more people. We know more Ukrainians, Russians, because that's the territory that the people are spreading. So it's more
Yeah,
likely to be connected more to the war.
yeah, and look, the drama of war is not at the geopolitical level. It's not at the level of numbers. Oh, 60 people died today. You don't see what's happening. To see what's happening, you have to go to the individual level. Yesterday, someone known to someone else I know, in other words, 2 degrees away from me, a soldier, a young man in his 20s, he was injured at the front lines, and he lost both his arms, both his eyes, and he's 70% deaf, and he's alive. That's war. You take this and you multiply by thousands a week. That's war. And if you tell me this is a deliberate, considered, thought through choice of the mind of nature, I don't know. I don't think it is. I think the mind of nature is an instinctive mind. It's spontaneous. It doesn't really know what it's doing. It's reacting to its own excitations. It's trying to find its way around this drama, this absurd confusion, and we are its spies. We are the spies of God, so to say. We are the ones watching what's happening now. To people like you and me, this guy is. He could be me. He looks like me. He has the same values I have. His life was pretty much the same as my life, largely. You went to the movies, like the same movies, as a wife, a young wife. Um, to see this, that's our spying for nature. We are seeing nature from a perspective that nature itself is not seen, from a dissociated perspective, seemingly from the outside. And hopefully, when we die, these insights will go into nature, so nature can sort of, get its act together. Because for how long will this shit keep happening? So no,
What if nature is very young and like at that, like that kids that they make things just to rebel or something? I don't know.
well, that already requires a certain level of self-awareness and premeditation. Look, forget the emotional charge. Let's talk objective evidence here. If this mind of nature I'm talking about is the foundation level of nature, the most foundational level. There is nothing beneath it. It's what there is. So if that mind of nature in and of itself were intrinsically metacognizant and self-aware, able of introspection and deliberation, all these higher level mental functions, if it had all that intrinsically, then a mouse should have introspection and deliberation and metacognition and self-awareness. An amoeba should have that. A tree should have that. Because what we are saying here is that high-level mental functions are woven into the very fabric of nature. So everything has it. But that's not what it looks like. It looks like less evolved living beings have much lower mental functions. They hardly recognize themselves in the mirror. It takes very evolved life to recognize itself in the mirror. They don't have the capacity to abstract, to introspect and re-represent their own contents of mind, to ponder their own emotions, to identify themselves as a subject separate from their experiences. They don't have that. They behave in a very spontaneous, instinctive way. So on the basis of that, I think every evidence points to the mind of nature in its raw state being a simple, spontaneous, instinctive mind that doesn't really know what it's doing. We know, because we evolved in a planetary ecosystem under the pressures of natural selection that have forced us to develop these higher level mental functions, this ability to metacognize, to take explicit notice of what's going on, and then to pass value judgment, to say, this is moral and this is not, this is good and this is bad. So we can look at what happened to the friend of my friend yesterday in Ukraine and say, this is not all right. This should not happen. This is not good. We are the eyes through which nature can realize that. I don't think nature in its underlying raw state knows it. We are playing the game of learning that, and it's a bloody long game, almost unbearably long.
I understand. So we are the ones that will correct this, because we are the ones being aware of it and passing the message to nature.
Hopefully we can play some modest role. Now, is that a big role? I don't think so. If you look at the Earth in comparison to the magnitude of the known universe, we are much less than specks of dust running around a speck of dust. So, on the other hand, the greatness of an experience has nothing to do with its spatial dimensions.
Yes. So
Suffering
maybe we are
can
the
be as big.
important part of the
Yeah,
universe.
perhaps at an experiential level,
Because
our
space
diminutive
and
size
time
means
gets irrelevant with what you are talking about, right? With
time.
if you are right, space and time is irrelevant to what you are talking about.
Irrelevant is too strong. I would say they are not fundamental. I think space and time are the dimensions of the dashboard. They are not out there. They are not an objective scaffolding of nature. Space and time are the dimensions according to which we organize our cognition in order to not be overwhelmed by informational input. So we sort of partition and organize our cognition along the arrows of space and time, so we don't get overwhelmed. I don't think space and time are out there. We make it up.
So I have a question for you. I notice when I speak with you, I sense a sense of calmness, and I'm curious to hear how this philosophy studying and all this stuff influenced your life personally.
I'm not sure people who know me in person would say that I am very calm. um, it has had one extraordinarily positive effect and one bad effect. I'll start with the positive one. It took me years to sort of embody my own philosophy because I am not a spiritual person. I'm not a meditator. I didn't come at it from the perspective of first person insight. I came at it out of conceptual reasoning, scientific, analytic reasoning. In other words, indirectly. And what happens is that even if you arrive at a conclusion with a lot of confidence, but you arrived at it through conceptual reasoning, um, that conclusion doesn't yet inform your emotional life. It remains a sort of a concept in your head. It doesn't sink into the body. It doesn't change your heart rate. It doesn't change your emotions. But after a few years, it does. And in my case, it did. And the effect was that today, meaninglessness, depression, they don't exist in my life. They have disappeared like ghosts. They just poof out of existence. So I don't experience anymore that sense that, oh, my life is for nothing, or this is all for nothing, or I'm suffering for no reason. Let me pull the plug on this, or things are not going my way. I wish this, I wish that. No, all of these self-centered chatter has disappeared. I remember what it is to feel depressed, but I don't come anywhere near it. My life is infused with a sense of natural meaning and purpose that is there regardless of what I do, regardless of the choices are made. It's unconditional sense of meaning and purpose. So that's been great. It's a very different life standing from where I am standing. A lot of suffering has gone away, but there is one
Does
thing
it
that got worse.
every day in your life now, when you embody this philosophy, like you see everything much more simpler in a way, as I understood, and everything much more as you, but I didn't understand exactly how why embodying this philosophy removes all the
Oh, yeah, I understand. So let's first think in terms of physicalism or materialism. According to materialism, your experiences will disappear at the end of your life. So everything that you've understood or had an insight on because of the suffering you went through throughout your life, all of those hard earned insights, that hard earned maturity, that adulthood that you finally got after suffering like a pig for years, that understanding that you finally got regarding human nature, the nature of life, the nature of the world, all of that under physicalism is ultimately guaranteed to be for nothing, because eventually you will die and all of those insights and memories are going to just disappear without a trace. And that can leave people to existential despair, which is, funny enough, the technical term for it, existential despair or existential angst, not in the sense of fear, but in the sense of despair. Um, but under idealism, all of your suffering is for a reason, because nothing is more conducive to learning than suffering. If you don't suffer, you don't ask the big questions. If you're just having fun in your life, you surf away your life at a very superficial level without thinking about anything very deeply because you're too busy having fun in an hedonistic life. But when we start to suffer, then sort of life puts a wall in front of us and forces us to contemplate the big question. Who am I? What is this all about? Where did I come from? What am I supposed to do? What is the meaning of it? Is there any purpose behind it? So suffering forces you to ask questions, and it's only by asking the questions that you can come to insights. So suffering is a tool for learning. Amazingly enough, you gotta suffer in order to truly learn. But if all of that learning is going to be for nothing at the end, then the whole thing is just cruel. It's just sadistic. But now that I understand that death is the end of my dissociation, and therefore all of my learnings are now just made available upon my death to nature as a whole, now I know that it wasn't for nothing. Now I know that I am a carrier of something that will contribute to the very fabric of
And
nature.
now maybe you have more motivation to learn and expand your horizon.
I no longer have that voice in my head saying, what's the point of this all? Why am I suffering like this? It's all for nothing. No, that voice has disappeared. When I suffer now, the first thing I do is I ask myself the question, okay, what is here for me to comprehend, for me to see? What do I need to see that I haven't seen before? And if I
Wow.
see that, I know that my death is a kind of a harvest for nature. That if I am a dissociative process, all of these insights are sort of...
What a beautiful way to see things.
Yeah, and look, I'm not saying this to sound spiritual. I mean, if you hadn't asked me, I never touch on this voluntarily because it's a very personal thing. But you asked me, did my life change for the better in some ways? And yes, in this way, it changed for the better. Because I no longer have that little devil telling me, this is all for nothing. You're suffering for nothing. It's all meaningless. Why do you wake up in the morning? Just roll up in a fetus position in a corner and wait to die. Because nothing has any meaning anyway. No, that's gone. That's gone. It has become abstract. But I,
The
again,
bad
have
thing.
fear of death. I fear death now, which I didn't
So,
before.
okay. And why is that?
You know, when I was working at CERN, I was very young and I was an unthinking materialist. I didn't think philosophy through. It's just that everybody around me was a physicalist. So I thought, okay, then I'm a physicalist too. And then I didn't fear death. I feared the process of dying because that can be painful. But death itself, no, because where I am, death is not. Where death is, I am not. Because when I die, there's nobody there to experience what comes after death. So I wasn't afraid of death because literally I wouldn't be there to experience it. But now I know I will be there. And I know that death is a major change in my state of consciousness. You know, if a psychedelic trip is already the most significant experience of people's lives, and psychedelics reduce brain activity, they don't increase. They only reduce brain metabolism by a little bit. And you can already have a major psychedelic trip, which sometimes is a bad trip, ego dissolution, with a reduced brain metabolism. Imagine what you will experience when there is no brain metabolism. You know, and I know I will be there to experience that. So if you ask me, am I afraid? Yes, I'm afraid. I prefer to be a physicalist in this sense. Because if I truly believe in physicalism, fear of death disappears. The problem is the price of physicalism, and the price is meaninglessness, is a complete failure of your sense of meaning. Life becomes arbitrary, gratuitous, it's for nothing, it's just sheer suffering for no reason. No, that price is too high. So if you ask me, do I prefer to have a unconditional sense of meaning like I have today and then fear death as opposed to the other way around? And I would say, yes, I prefer to be where I am now. Yeah, definitely. I don't like the fear, but I prefer it to the alternative.
So you are taking the red pill.
Taking what?
The red pill. You choose
Oh,
to see reality as it is.
I am constitutionally committed to truth. I was born this way. Since a kid, I used to ask my father. I'd ask him a question, and he'd tell me an answer that I thought, oh, this is one of those humbugs that you tell to kids. And then I would ask again, say, but Dad, now tell me the truth. So he would give me an answer, I would hear it, and then I would say, okay, now give me the truth, because that's what I want. I always had this constitutional commitment to what is true, which is not how everybody's put together. I mean, Nietzsche, the famous philosopher, he wrote extensively about this commitment to truth being illogical and insane. Why do we prefer truth? We should prefer whatever narrative we can believe in that makes life easier. This commitment to truth is insane, according to Nietzsche. And he has a point, but I can't help. That's how I'm put together. I cannot be other than this. I am committed. I want to know what is true, regardless of the price.
You mentioned in the beginning of the that you do 3 podcasts per week, 3 conversations per week.
On
Why?
average.
Why you find this an interesting pursuit, and why you do it?
Oh, I mean, it's been a lot of fun talking to you, but it's not always fun. So it's not like I want to do it for my personal enjoyment, because I've been doing this for years, and at some point you begin to repeat yourself so much that it becomes boring, almost. And now and then there is an interviewer that sort of brings a new life into it, and you did it today, so I'm very grateful for this. But the reason I do it is it has to do with my sense of self and our discussion about free will. I am at a point in my life where I am very, very aware that my life is not about me, about Bernardo Kastrup. It has never been, it will never be. The very idea that my life is about me is ridiculous. It's like an apple tree blossom in the spring saying, oh, my life is about me and I don't want to die. It's ridiculous. The apple tree blossom is there to be, to get a bee in there and then become an apple fruit that falls to the ground and gives rise to another apple tree so the dance of nature can go on. So the apple blossom's life is not about the apple blossom, it's about nature. If the apple blossom would tell you, my life's about me, you would laugh at it. That's a ridiculous thing to say. It's the same thing with us. We are blossoms of nature. We come out of nature. We are not aliens here. We didn't land from another dimension, from another reality. We were produced out of this reality. To think that our lives are about us as opposed to the grand dance of nature is, one, absurd, and two, incredibly claustrophobic. Incredibly claustrophobic. So I don't have that. I know I'm very aware my life's not about me. I'm in complete peace with it. I know I don't make the big choices. I know that what chooses is life, not Bernardo Kastrup. And the level of peace I have with it now is such that I don't choose to give an interview or not. I, to use metaphorical language, I move where the spirit wants to move. Know what I mean? And if I feel, and I have developed the ability, I think now, to notice the difference between what I want and what nature wants through me. It's very difficult to find that difference, but it is possible. And I think I figured out how to see that difference. So if I
Please
hear that,
explain to the world how you find that difference, like, because it's like having, I don't know, sexual things with women or all this stuff feels like it's that it feels like what is you, I don't know, or maybe what is, I don't know. So what is intellectual, reading a book, playing video game, and what, how do you define that? It's very thin line that you know, like, is it a
yeah. Look, but just to complete what I wanted to say, I give these interviews because that's what I feel nature wants to do through me, not because I want to do it. I'm an introvert. I have no personal need to appear in the media or to be well known. On the contrary, I would prefer not to. But I do this because I sense that's what nature wants to do through me, and it's about nature. It's not about me. Now, how do you notice the difference, because the prime directive of mind is to deceive itself. And human beings, because of the circumstances of our culture, which are extremely unnatural circumstances, we don't live in a natural way at all. Because of that, we human beings seek to compensate for our unnatural way of living, thinking, and feeling through addictive patterns of behavior. And when I say addictive, I don't mean only drugs or cigarettes. I also mean sex, meat, sugar, reality television. These are all addictive patterns of behavior that we have the tendency to adopt in order to compensate for a great hole in the middle of our chest that is caused by our unnatural way of living, thinking, feeling, and relating to one another. That voice of addiction that comes from within you, what I want now is to have sex with a girl like this and that. What I want now is to eat a bucket of ice cream. What I want now is that fix, give me that heroin, or that bottle of alcohol, or that reality TV show. That voice of the addictive pattern of behavior is a very big voice inside. And it is not the voice of nature. It's the voice of existential despair. We are in an unbearable condition that we think is insoluble. So the best we can do is to try to compensate for it through some form of addiction that distracts us from confronting the reality of our unnatural situation, our unnatural life. So I don't want to tell you that you should just listen to that voice inside, because that voice inside, more often than not, is the voice of addiction. It's not the voice of nature. It's the voice of your existential despair. It's the voice of that kid within you that is crying his heart out, who cannot bear this existence and just needs to be soothed by something. And it's desperately trying to be soothed because of the unbearable condition it finds itself in. So how do you find the real voice of nature? Yeah. Videos, if I cannot tell you 7 steps to listening to the voice of nature, there is no recipe. I can talk around it, if you like. I can talk around it and give you hints. What the voice of nature wants tends to have nothing to do with what is better for you personally. It doesn't choose the career that will give you the highest salary and the best security. It doesn't choose the partner that will make it easier for you to live. It doesn't choose the activity that is easiest and most pleasant for you to do. Often it has an absolute disregard for your personal safety and comfort. It uses you as a tool. It's not preoccupied with whether the tool is all right or not. It has a completely impersonal agenda that does not have your best interest in mind. That's one sign of the voice of nature. Another sign is that it doesn't scream.
Like the
It's
other
not.
one does.
Yeah. It's the voice of addiction screams, grabs you by the balls and says, "Now, you got to do it now." The voice of nature is more subtle, but it's also more constant. It's
Oh my
always
God,
there.
it's so beautiful because yes, you're right. It's that when you want to have sex, or when you want to eat ice cream, or when you want to go and watch a movie, or when you want to scroll to TikTok, the thing is so vivid, like you can
Yeah,
feel it, that is drawing. But
yeah,
yes,
yeah. But there is another aspect to this, because although the voice of nature is not loud, in my experience, it can come across as cruel. And let me try to explain this so you don't understand it wrongly. The voice of addiction hangs a carrot in front of you It tells you, look how good you're going to have it if you only do this, if you only go to bed with that girl, if you only take this pill, if you only drink this glass of wine. You will feel very good, right? So it's a carrot hanging in front of you. It pulls from the front through seduction. The voice of nature, in my case, I don't know whether it's the same with other people. In my case, it pushes from behind by kicking you in the butt, not by hanging a carrot in front of you. Um, so in my case, if I am not doing nature's bidding, it becomes very hard for me to sleep. It becomes hard for me to pay attention to anything. My heart rate increases. I start having a sense of impending doom, like something very bad is going to happen, although I have no reason to think that. It starts making my life impossible until I finally do the thing. So in that sense, it's totally different from the voice of addiction, because you are no, you're fine, you are in a good place, and then there comes that thing that starts making you feel bad. um, and in my experience, once I start doing what I'm supposed to do, then everything's okay again. And often it's writing books. I have a period behind me of about 2 years in which I wrote nothing. I sort of got a holiday from the voice of nature. For 10 years I was writing nonstop, because if I stopped writing, my life would turn bad very quickly. Even health conditions would pop, and I wouldn't be able to sleep and to be calm. But then I had 2 years holiday, and something in my mind was telling me, this is just a holiday. Enjoy while you can, because it's going to start again. And then it started again summer last year. And for 6 months, I resisted it. I said, no, I want this holiday to be a little longer. I don't want to write. I never want to write. There hasn't been a single book I wanted to write. I wrote 12, one unpublished yet. Not one of them did I really want to write. But at some point, late last year, beginning this year, it became just unbearable. So I started writing again, and now I'm okay again. So yeah, that's how it is for me. Maybe with other people, the voice of nature also seduces you, attracts you instead of kicking your butt, making you go where you don't want to go. But with me, it's like this. So it has no consideration for my personal safety and humor and comfort. So my ego has to stay alert, because if I only listen to the voice of nature, I will end up without a penny in the bank, no roof over my head, and no food on the plate. And I cannot be a tool if I don't eat and I don't have a minimum degree of safety and means to be active in the world. So my ego jumps in and says, no, not that far. I need the basics. I need a home. I need food. I need a relationship and some money in the bank. Doesn't need to be much, but some. But beyond that, the voice of nature doesn't care about my comfort, my personal circumstances, my wishes and desires. It doesn't seduce. It kicks from behind. It's not loud, but it's constant. It can be overwhelming in a quiet way. And there are other characteristics, but at least I talked about it, talked around it a little bit.
I want to say, it's like you're just speaking to my heart the whole time that you are speaking now, because I kind of sense similar stuff in my life when I'm doing something useful and all this stuff that I think is whatever is what nature wants me to do. I feel like a lot more energized, excited, and all this stuff. But if I shift from that, I feel this what you described. So you were talking to my heart when you are talking. So it's beautiful. I always ask the guests, if you had $1 trillion, how you will use them for impact in the world.
Oh, that would be just about the worst scenario. I have a very good friend, my best friend, who happens to have a lot of money. and I see what that does to him. That sense of responsibility. Life has entrusted me with these means. It's my responsibility to know what is the best thing, the most responsible thing to do with this for the sake of us all. And that sense of responsibility doesn't leave you. It's with you all the time, unless you're a jerk. If you're a jerk, then you know what to do. You buy the next yacht and you have 30 different girlfriends in 30 different countries and you fly around polluting the planet and you have a ball. But if you are a decent human being in sync with nature, like my friend is, much more than me even, the sense of responsibility is not one I want to have. So you just described to me one of the things that I would pay to not be in those circumstances, because it would basically mean that my life would truly not be about me at all. I would be in the service of those resources all the time. Jesus. I wouldn't be able to build my little computers at night like I still do, or have a relationship. So I don't know. I hope it doesn't happen. I have no idea what I would do. I would give to some charities I trust, but $1 trillion is way too much money. Very easy to waste for no reason. So I have no idea. Some of the key problems we have are not about money, are about our values and regulations. For instance, um, climate change, pollution, the water crisis, the food crisis, the energy crisis, and many geopolitical problems that come paired with the energy crisis, all of that could be resolved in 10 years by investing in nuclear reactors that have passive safety instead of active safety. In other words, there are nuclear reactor technologies out there that if you pull the plug, they just shut down. Totally cold. They don't need any cooling. They don't need containment. They need nothing. They need to have an energy input to keep reacting. For instance, wavefront reactors that Bill Gates is investing into. We could solve all this. We could have, urban vertical farming driven by LED lights. Why can't we have it today? It's too much energy. We would pollute too much with coal-fired energy centrals if we would do that. We can't have that. We have the drinkable water crisis. Why do we have it? Well, we can desalinate ocean water. We know how to do it. Why don't we do it? Because it takes a lot of energy. It takes a huge amount of energy to do water desalination. We have a pollution problem. Can we solve it? Sure. Passive safety nuclear reactors consume nuclear waste. You can take nuclear waste produced for the past 60 years, and that can be the fuel of these new nuclear reactor technologies. Why don't we then just do that? Because you can't build a prototype in the United States and test it. It's against the law. Germany will not touch it with a 10-foot pole because they have a so-called green policy. This would be the ultimate green solution, but they don't do that. They want to phase out every nuclear reactor. So if I had $1 trillion, I could tell you I would invest in absolutely solving the energy crisis in 10 years. But the $1 trillion is not enough because the regulations don't allow for that to happen. That's why Bill Gates is going to China, because China allows for that to happen. And we think Bill Gates is a jerk. He's talking to Xi Jinping. Maybe he just has long-term vision. He knows that, it may be worthwhile to pay a geopolitical price in order to be able to build a prototype of a wavefront reactor in China. It's the only country that allows for this. So we can develop the technology that we will be in a desperate need of in 20 or 30 years, and which we will not have then unless we begin testing now. And Bill Gates has 100 billion. It's not $1 trillion. But he has the money. Why is this not happening? It's not the money. And that's the problem, Phidias. Often, the money is the easy part. The difficult part is how human beings finally manage to have a sane, unbiased cultural dialogue. This has proven impossible throughout history, and it's not looking better now than it was before. But the ultimate solution is for human beings to understand and find a way to have a sane, unbiased cultural dialogue. If that were possible, you know, the money then would be there.
Well, what you're saying is very interesting because Elon Musk tweeted like allocating money is the easiest job for me, because if money was solving problems, then the government of the United States will not have any problems.
Yeah, the government of the United States can print money. So it's not about the money, it's about what you would do with that resource, knowing what to do with it. As a culture, not as an individual who happens to own the money, that's not enough. It's a culture knowing how to apply its resources. That is the challenge. And of course, if one person has a lot of money, that reduces the need for debate because that person has the ownership of the money. So the person chooses, and you can choose very badly, like Elon Musk just destroyed over $30 billion in value in the most childish way possible recently. Um, but even if you are a wise dictator, a good emperor, as people in democracies today dream of, because democracy is too messy. Let's have a dictator, but let's hope he's a wise dictator. Even if you have that wise dictator, it's not enough, because the rest of your population, the rest of the people on that boat with you, um, their work has to be mobilized. And it's not enough to force them or to pay them a salary. They have to understand the meaning of what they are doing. They have to want to do it. Because if they don't, they have no creativity, they are not effective, they are not efficient, they will just move paper around and they will achieve nothing. So we need a culture level mobilization to truly solve our problems. But to have a cultural level mobilization, we have to have a sane, unbiased cultural dialogue. And that's proven, is being proven, is being, you know, it seems to be impossible on both sides of the divide so far. Both sides alienate the other, see the other as different, fundamentally different, see the other not as an opponent, but as an enemy. And that's a problem. That's a problem.
Uh, so I so I am the most famous person ever lived in my country, and Cyprus. And I have the opportunity to become, let's say, if I choose to, become the president of the country when I go older. Now I'm 23, but so with when you were talking about all this stuff, this political stuff, I wanted I want to ask you, do you think this is a worthwhile pursuit to become president? Do you think the president has power to change things? Do you think like it's better to create businesses that are helping the world? Like where you think, what do you think about this?
I think you should try to listen to the voice of nature. It will tell you. And the thing is, another characteristic of the voice of nature, Phidias, is that it doesn't explain to you up front why it wants you to do this or that. It gives you no explanation. It doesn't give you closure. It doesn't debate with you. It just says, do this. Oh, but why? Why should I do this? No, you don't need to know. You don't need to know. So at some point in your life, if you pay attention, this is not a skill. You only need to pay attention. At some point in your life, if you have been paying attention all along, you will be able to discern that voice. And you know, oh, okay, that's not the voice of addiction. That's not the voice of ego validation. That's the voice of nature. And one of the characteristics that it has is that it's not going to tell you the why. It's just going to tell you the what. And sometimes the why turn out to be something totally different than what you expected in the beginning. So if at some point in your life you feel that quiet voice within saying, I should, I should fight an election. You don't need to know the why. It will not explain you the why. But if you can discern that and that's what it's telling you, then go for it. It would be irresponsible not to go for it.
So I want to say that honestly, I watch a lot of your podcasts, but this is this experience of this podcast kind of it broke any expectations that I had. This was amazing. Like you teach me so many stuff. You teach the like your vibe. The was is amazing. So I just want to thank you for your time. I want to say to people, we are going to put all your books and other stuff that you have in the description below for people to go and download them. Subscribe, guys, to this YouTube channel. And I love you. Thank you for your time.
The feeling is mutual. You are a very thoughtful young man. It was a pleasure to talk to you. So thank you for this, too, Phidias.
Let's do this again in the future.
Sure, I'm game.